Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I'm going to be covering the 7-day consolidated figures for Doctor Who Season 2 Episode 1, The Robot Revolution. It got over 1.5 million viewers on catch-up, bringing the total to just over 3.5 million. We're going to be breaking down the figures and giving you my thoughts on them, so sit back, relax and enjoy. Subscribe if you do, that would be greatly appreciated. We do regular Doctor Who content here on the channel and any support is greatly appreciated. But with that said, let's get right into it. Official ratings: Doctor Who with over 1.5 million in catch-up. The final number for The Robot Revolution reached 3.57 million. The show was the fourth most watched programme on Saturday 12th, as Britain's Got Talent led with 5.24 and 21st for the week. So this is interesting for a number of reasons. 1.5 million on catch-up is significant because that's a huge chunk of the overall viewer base watching purely on catch-up. I saw some people say that like 80% of the viewers come from the live viewing. That's obviously nonsense because the live viewing was 2 million and this is 1.5, which is less, but it makes up a huge portion of the number of people who are actually watching the show. What is interesting though is that if you look at this, it says 21st for the week. Now initially I thought, given the fact that Doctor Who was on 3.5 million and Britain's Got Talent was on 5.2, that seemed like a bit weird because that's not a huge gap. But I looked at it and apparently it's just because there's like a shed load of Emmerdale episodes that were on that week, which explains why Doctor Who reaches 21st. Because if you actually look at the difference between Gladiators, which was on 3.9 million and was 10th for the week, and Doctor Who, it's not really that far apart. It just looks like it because of how many Emmerdale episodes broadcast every week. But overall, I think actually this is about what I was expecting. If we look at last year, the overnight figure for episode 1 was 2.6 million, with a TV-only figure of 3.71 million, and a full-screen figure of 4.01. I don't know whether this includes full-screen or whether this is just TV only. I would assume this is full-screen. Let me double-check what it was last year. Hold on. So yeah, last year they included it as part of the 7-day plus full-screen figure, so the 4.01 million, which does mark a drop between Season 1 and Season 2. However, this is largely to be expected between series. You know, there's less of a novelty between a first and second series. Obviously, a new Doctor always has slightly more in their debut series than their follow-up. But this isn't actually a huge drop, actually. I was actually considering maybe a little bit of a bigger drop-off in viewership for Doctor Who this year when compared to last year. But actually, I think what this shows is that the number of people who are watching is staying relatively steady, which I think is very interesting. I have no doubt that, as always, whenever I cover viewing figures, I'm going to go, oh, this is cope. But if you want to look at this, so if you look at this, right, the two biggest viewing figures for last week was The Apprentice and Britain's Got Talent. The Apprentice with 5.3 million, basically 5.4 actually, and Britain's Got Talent with 5.2. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, Doctor Who was getting, 7 or 8 million viewers in, 2011. Do you want to know how many viewers Britain's Got Talent was getting in 2011? 11 million. Now it's getting 5. So if we extrapolate that, let's say that the average for Britain's Got Talent was about 10 million. It's now down to 5. So that means it's lost, about half the viewers it used to get. If we look then again at Doctor Who, let's say that its average was around 7 or 8 million. Let's say 7 million, judging by this, for Series 6. That means that since 2011, it's also gone down by about half, so about 3.5. So this is pretty much in line with general, TV trends in the UK. TV is just generally down across the board. Am I saying that Doctor Who is as popular as it could be? No, not necessarily. I would like to see it maybe break the top 10, although I do think it's hard given how many episodes of soaps there are. Considering that 5 million is about the ceiling for TV, 3.5 million doesn't strike me as the apocalyptic figure that some people are going to claim it is. We can actually directly compare where Coronation Street was compared to Battlefield. Battlefield being the debut episode of Season 26, which is the last series of classic Doctor Who, and what a lot of people compare where we are currently at with Doctor Who. So as you can see, Part 1 of Battlefield broadcast on September 6, 1989, with 3.1 million viewers. Contrast that with the Coronation Street episode that day, Wednesday 6th of September, where they got 16 million. That's the difference between where we're at now and where we were in the 80s. In the 80s, Doctor Who's 3 million was a fraction of what the big players were getting. Now, it's pretty much in line with most of them. That's the difference I need to highlight. Doctor Who may not be in its absolute prime, but when you actually compare it to most other shows on British television, its decline is largely proportionate with every other show on British television. If we look at Series 7 of The Apprentice, also airing at 2011, that was getting on average around 8 million viewers, as we see here, and now it's getting around 5 million. The decline is fairly obvious, but no one ever calls these other shows, Corrie, Britain's Got Talent, The Apprentice, no one ever goes, oh, they stopped watching because of woke, because that's ridiculous. If you actually look at the figures in context, they line up largely with industry trends. And I'm actually going to make a little bit of a prediction. I actually think that Lux could see quite a big catch-up figure because the character of Mr. Ring-a-Ding has been going viral across all of social media. I've seen people talking about Doctor Who for the first time in ages that I didn't even know knew what Doctor Who was, so I'm going to make a little bit of a prediction that we won't actually see much at all of a drop-off between episode 1 and episode 2 this year. In fact, maybe, potentially, this is a bit of a mountain to climb given that it did debut to a lower number. I reckon it's possible that Lux could actually overtake the Robot Revolution because it's been received incredibly well and its social media traction is huge. And all of this is not even considering the real factor in Doctor Who's ongoing longevity anyway, which is the Disney aspect of it. We don't know how well it's doing on Disney. I did see a tweet saying that it had reached the top 10 in Australia on Disney+, so take that as you will. But as always, I fully expect to get comments saying I'm coping in the comment section below. And look, you know, I'd like Doctor Who to be a little bit higher, but relatively speaking, it's not that out of line with where most of the TV industry is, if you actually look at it proportionally. Doctor Who was always performing worse than the likes of Britain's Got Talent, even at its absolute peak. I just get kind of sick of Doctor Who being treated, like, completely differently to every other TV show on British television. Every other TV show has seen a decline since Doctor Who's peak in the 2000s and 2010s, but no other show gets as much scrutiny as Doctor Who does. And I realise to a certain extent that I am part of said scrutiny, but the reason that I do these videos and the reason that I report on the viewing figures is because I feel like it's somewhat important to have someone out there looking at these figures relatively objectively, not just going number lower than it was 10 years ago, therefore bad, which I feel like is what 90% of the commentary online has devolved into over time. But that's all I'm going to say. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys think. Subscribe if you're new, like if you enjoy, and I'll see you later.